Hey everyone, and welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told as Podcast. Tonight, we're diving into a story that's both heartbreaking and incredibly important.
Yeah, it is.
It's a story about a night that changed countless lives forever. The Station Nightclub fire.
It's a story that really highlights how quickly things can go wrong, especially when it comes to fire safety. Even though this happened over 20 years ago, the lessons we can learn from the station fire are still relevant today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's one of those events that sticks with you even if you weren't directly affected. So let's set the scene. It's February 20, 2003 in West Warwick, Rhode Island. The Station Nightclub, a popular local spot known for its live music, is hosting the 80s rock band Great White.
And you have to understand, the station was a place with a certain vibe. It had this history, having been around for a while, even passing fire inspections just a few months before the fire. People felt comfortable there.
Which makes the events that unfolded even more tragic. Can you paint a picture for our listeners of what the station was like? Was it a small, intimate venue or a larger space?
It was a one-story wooden building, originally a gin mill, then a restaurant. And eventually, in the 90s, it became this go-to spot for rock fans. They especially loved hosting those hard rock and tribute bands, the kind that brought back the energy of the 80s.
So a place steeped in nostalgia, catering to a crowd looking for a good time. And on this particular night, that crowd was there to see Great White, a band past their prime, but still holding on to some of that 80s rock star swagger.
Exactly. They were known for their glam metal style, like big hair, loud music, and pyrotechnics, which, as we know, played a significant role in this story.
Okay, let's talk about Great White for a second. Were they known for using pyrotechnics in their shows? Was this something that was expected, or was it a surprise to the audience and the club owners?
Well, they had been using them on their tour leading up to that night, but there were reports that some venues actually denied them permission to use pyrotechnics due to safety concerns. So there's this question that hangs over the entire event. Were they authorized to use them at the station?
That's a huge question, and one that I'm sure we'll dig into further as we unpack the events of that night. But before we do, I want to take a quick moment to encourage all our listeners to hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss out on all the other fascinating deep dives we have planned on. Tell me more. Now back to the Station Nightclub. You've got a packed house, an 80s rock band ready to go, and this underlying tension about the use of pyrotechnics. What happens next?
Well, the band kicks off their set around 11 p.m. with their song Desert Moon. The energy in the club is high, the crowd is pumped, and then the pyrotechnics go off.
And those pyrotechnics ignited something they weren't supposed to.
Tragically, yes. The sparks from the pyrotechnics came into contact with highly flammable polyurethane foam that had been installed on the walls for soundproofing.
Wait, flammable foam? That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. And to make matters worse, this type of foam wasn't fire retardant and was actually a violation of state fire codes.
So you've got this incredibly dangerous material lining the walls of a crowded nightclub, and no one seemed to realize the potential consequences.
It appears that way. And within seconds, the flames were visible on the wall above the stage. The crowd, initially thinking it was part of the show, cheered. They had no idea what was about to unfold.
Oh, wow. I can't even imagine the feeling of realizing that what you thought was a special effect was actually a raging fire.
It must have been terrifying. People were trapped, the fire was spreading rapidly, and the exits became a major problem.
Let's talk about those exits. How many were there and what condition were they in? Was there a clear path to safety for those inside?
The club had 4 exits, but the main exit, the one everyone used to enter, quickly became a bottleneck. People instinctively rushed towards that familiar doorway, creating a crush of bodies in the narrow hallway leading to it.
And you mentioned earlier that the club was packed that night. Was it over capacity?
Yes, significantly. It was designed to hold 404 people, but that night there were 462 people inside. That overcrowding made the situation at the main exit even more chaotic and dangerous.
So you've got a panicked crowd, a rapidly spreading fire, and a major bottleneck at the main exit. What about the other exits? Were they accessible?
There were 3 other exits, but they weren't without their own issues. One was a smaller side door, and there are accounts of bouncers blocking that exit, possibly to prevent people from leaving without paying. Whether it was intentional or just confusion in the chaos, it tragically blocked a potential escape route for those trapped inside.
This is just heartbreaking. It sounds like people were trapped with very few options for escape. In those crucial first moments of the fire, how quickly did it spread?
Shockingly fast. Remember that flammable foam? It became fuel for the fire, allowing it to spread with unbelievable speed. Within just 6 minutes, the entire club was engulfed in flames.
6 minutes. That's barely enough time to process what's happening, let alone evacuate a crowded nightclub.
It was a nightmare scenario, and with the fire spreading so rapidly, the focus shifted to the response from emergency services. How quickly did they arrive on the scene? What were the challenges they faced?
These are all crucial questions that we need to address. But before we get into the response and the aftermath of this tragedy, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll delve deeper into the events that unfolded at the station nightclub fire and examine the lasting impact it had on fire, safety regulations, and public awareness. Stay with us. And we're back, continuing our deep dive into the tragic events of the station nightclub fire. We've talked about the band, the flammable foam, the overcrowded club, and those terrifying moments as the fire began to spread. Now let's shift our focus to the response from emergency services.
Thankfully, the West Warwick Fire Department was alerted almost immediately. A police officer who happened to be near the club saw the flames and called it in right away. And the first fire engine arrived at the scene just 6 minutes after the fire started.
6 minutes? That's incredibly fast. Given the speed at which the fire spread, every second must have counted.
Absolutely. But even with that quick response, the firefighters faced an inferno. The heat was intense, the smoke was thick, and the building itself was rapidly becoming unstable.
It's hard to fathom what those firefighters encountered when they arrived. Were they able to get inside the building to rescue people?
They did everything they could. They fought their way through the flames and smoke, pulling people out of the burning building. But the conditions were incredibly challenging. And sadly, despite their heroic efforts, the fire claimed the lives of 100 people that night.
It's a devastating number. And as we've discussed, the flammable foam played a significant role in the rapid spread of the fire. But was that the only factor? Did the investigation uncover other contributing causes to this tragedy?
The investigation was extensive, and it revealed a cascade of failures that led to this horrific outcome. One of the most glaring oversights was the lack of a sprinkler system in the club.
It seems inconceivable that a place with that capacity hosting live music events wouldn't have a basic safety feature like sprinklers.
You would think so. But the station, having been built in 1946, fell under a grandfather clause in the building code.
For those who might not be familiar with the term, can you explain what a grandfather clause is and how it applied in this case?
Certainly, a grandfather clause basically exempts existing structures from newer regulations. So even though building codes at the time required sprinkler systems in new nightclubs, older establishments like the station weren't obligated to install them.
So a tragic loophole in the system allowed this incredibly dangerous situation to exist.
Exactly. And if the station had been equipped with sprinklers, it's highly likely that the fire spread could have been significantly contained, giving people more time to evacuate and potentially saving lives.
It's a stark reminder of how important it is to not only have safety regulations, but to ensure they're up to date and effectively enforced.
I completely agree. The station fire exposed those gaps in the system, those places where regulations fell short or weren't applied consistently.
And in the aftermath of this tragedy, did those regulations change?
Yes, there was a major push for reform. Many states, including Rhode Island, strengthened their fire codes, making sprinkler systems mandatory in nightclubs and similar venues, regardless of when they were built.
It's a positive step, but a tragic one. It took a horrific event like this to bring about change that should have been in place all along.
Sadly, that's often the case. But it's crucial to remember that those changes came about because of the tireless efforts of the victims' families and advocates who fought to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening again.
It's a testament to their strength and determination.
Yeah.
Now, beyond the changes to fire codes, did this tragedy have a broader impact on public awareness and personal responsibility when it comes to safety?
Absolutely. The station fire became a national wake-up call. It forced people to think about their own safety in public spaces and to ask questions about things they might have taken for granted before. Where are the exits? What are the fire safety procedures?
It's so easy to get complacent to assume that everything is fine, especially when you're out to have a good time.
And that's why this story is so important to remember. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in our own safety and the safety of those around us. It's about being informed, being aware, and knowing what to do in an emergency.
So we've talked about the fire itself, the response, the investigation, and the regulatory change that followed. But there's another layer to this story that we need to address. The human cost. 100 people lost their lives, and hundreds more were injured, many with life-altering injuries. Can you talk about the impact this tragedy had on the victims, their families, and the community as a whole?
The emotional toll of the station fire is immeasurable. The grief, the trauma, the scars, both visible and invisible, are lasting reminders of that night. And the ripple effects continue to spread through families, friendships, and the entire community.
It's hard to even fathom the pain and loss experienced by those who were there that night, those who lost loved ones, those who witnessed the horror unfold.
It's a pain that never truly goes away. And it's important to acknowledge that alongside the investigations, the legal battles, the code changes, there are real people whose lives were forever changed.
We're back with the final part of our deep dive into the station nightclub fire. And, it's been a heavy conversation, but an important one. We've covered the events, the aftermath, the legal battles, and the changes that followed. But what resonates with me most is the human element, those individual stories of courage, resilience, and sadly loss.
It's easy to get caught up in the technical details, the fire codes, the legal ramifications, but at the heart of it all, this is a story about people. People who went out for a night of music and never came home, families who were shattered, a community forever marked by this tragedy.
And those individual stories are what make this event so impactful. It's not just a statistic. It's not just a news headline. It's a collection of human experiences, each one unique and profound.
Exactly. And while we can't bring those lost back, we can honor their memory by learning from what happened, by ensuring that their stories serve as a catalyst for change.
Speaking of change, we've talked about the impact this station fire had on fire safety regulations. Those changes were crucial, but did they go far enough? Are there still gaps in the system that need to be addressed?
Well, it's a continuous process. While there have been significant improvements, complacency can be a dangerous enemy. We need to constantly evaluate and update our safety standards, especially as new technologies emerge and our understanding of fire dynamics evolves.
It's about staying ahead of the curve, anticipating potential risks, and not waiting for another tragedy to force our hand.
Precisely. And it's not just about regulations and codes, it's about creating a culture of safety, where everyone from venue owners to performers to patrons understands their role and takes responsibility for creating a safe environment.
It's about that shared accountability, that collective awareness that can prevent these kinds of disasters from happening again.
Exactly. And it starts with education, with raising awareness, with having those sometimes uncomfortable conversations about safety. Because it's not about being alarmist, it's about being informed and empowered.
As we've been talking, I've been thinking about the role of personal responsibility. What are some practical things our listeners can do to be more aware of their surroundings and make safer choices when they're out in public places?
That's a great point. We all have a role to play in our own safety. When you enter a venue, take a moment to locate the exits, familiarize yourself with the layout. If the place seems overcrowded, trust your instincts and consider leaving.
It's about being proactive, not reactive, not waiting for an emergency to happen before thinking about how to escape.
Exactly. And don't hesitate to ask questions. If you see something that seems unsafe, if you have concerns about fire exits or overcrowding, speak up. Don't assume someone else will take care of it.
It's about taking ownership of our safety and advocating for a safer environment for everyone.
Absolutely. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about fire safety, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions and take appropriate actions.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the station nightclub fire. It's been a difficult but crucial conversation, a reminder of the human cost of complacency and the enduring importance of vigilance.
Thank you for joining us. Let's honor the memory of those lost by carrying their stories forward and working together to create a safer world for all.
Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep exploring the world with Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast.